Now, why isn't multi-touch attribution legit? Why is what I'm saying of Northbeam is built around solving a problem that is unsolvable because the question is illegitimate? Why is Hyros basically there to feed the ego of the marketer and actually a liability to the growth of a brand? Why is Wicked Reports really powerful and almost useless when it comes to in-platform decision making? Well, we talked a lot about this, about what is MTA and who is it designed to help, because that explains a lot of it. But getting down to why isn't this information legitimate is because it might be an accurate reflection of the average customer journeys that have come through your store. The problem is it doesn't help you make future decisions. Data that is inactionable is useless. My point here is ultimately, if you get a whole bunch of information and based on that information, you're not able to make any decision, how helpful was that information? Does it in fact help you to understand that 20% of customers see this ad inside of this Facebook campaign, and then they see an email, and then they go over here and we're going to get 40% credit to search and 30% over to email and 10% to Amazon, and then that broad campaign, well, it loses money at the top of the, but the interest group does really, really well because of the ROAS, and then we've got this retargeting ad set that's doing really well. We know the ROAS is like a 5, and that's unsustainable. Really, maybe it's a 2, and we'll just keep scaling it. That is a tremendously complex situation. It's also completely illegitimate because you have no way of controlling how somebody entered that situation. You have no way of controlling how that works. And ultimately, what's most important is that doesn't help you solve the growth of your business. MTA, multi-touch attribution. I've seen this done above and beyond the Hyros and Wicked Reports and Northbeams of the world. I've seen this installed in 8- and 9-figure businesses. Let me tell you what ultimately happens. The end game for multi-touch attribution is one of 3 things. First, the brand is really successful with really smart people running every department. And the attribution model that everybody's happy with is the one that makes every department look good on the P&L. Situation number 2. The business is really successful because the business model is phenomenal and it's really good at acquiring profitable customer journeys. And because of that, it will live and die, not so much because of the advertising, although the advertising is helpful. It lives and dies because the business model is tremendously strong. And to be fair, most successful businesses fall into this category. They are really, really good businesses. And spending money on ads promotes that business, but it's not the reason that they're super successful or fail miserably. Most brands fall into this. Now there's some unicorns that index way out of this, and there are some brands where legitimately really good marketing campaigns were the reason that they really blew up. Look at FTX. Really good influencer marketing campaigns is the reason that it blew up. You can directly point to one thing being the reason that everything else did really well. Those are the extreme exceptions to the rule. Odds are your store has a pretty decent business model. Odds are your store is pretty good at advertising. And odds are your store isn't going to succeed or fail miserably because of the efforts of any one specific person in any one specific marketing department. Odds are your store, what's holding you back isn't figuring out how to scale Facebook to the moon. It's figuring out how to get a better lifetime value out of your customers and ultimately figuring out the most efficient way of starting customer journeys to mature to that lifetime value, what we call PSM. Scaling a business is all about the acquisition of profitable customer journeys. The problem here is that these tools that pitch themselves, now there are other tools out there, but those other tools do not pitch themselves as multi-touch attribution marketing tools. And that's a very important distinction. It is in the DNA of Hyros and Wicked Reports, etc., to tell you what ad gets credit. That exists because the marketer, the client for that business, is more interested in understanding how to get credit than in how to grow the business. And that's a very different conversation. If you've ever noticed that ad sets die after a while because you're using an interest group or a lookalike audience, or your retargeting audience becomes too saturated or something, and it eventually stops working, and you say, well, you know, all audience is fatigue. I'm here to tell you that's objectively not true. 100% not true. Fraud doesn't fatigue. Fraud is effectively infinitely scalable to the size of your market. When you are using these audiences to try to chase yesterday's performance and be reactive to a average of averages view on a customer journey, at best, you are going to run out of the unfair advantage that that potential investment has over just going broad. And to be fair, that happens a lot. You can chase interest group after interest group after interest group and continue to scale it to the moon, and then it dies, and scale it to the moon, and then it dies, and scale it to the moon, and then it dies. And maybe that business grows or it doesn't. The point here is that business going from a $2 million business to a $20 million business has nothing to do with the audiences that you're targeting. It has nothing to do with what ad gets credit for a sale. In fact, when you try to start going down the rabbit hole of chasing multi-touch attribution to see what gets credit so you can try to make decisions based on retroactive data of averaging averages of customer journeys that you cannot control, eventually every one of those decisions depreciates in value. Which is why we ultimately have to get to platforms being simple machines built on AI and in machine learning, where effectively you're training your employees to get better and better over time. Now, every time you turn off an ad set because it fatigued, that means you've invested into an asset that depreciates over time. And when you turn it off, you've effectively run out of opportunity and ultimately wasted your investment. Now, the reason, what this has to do with MTA and multi-touch attribution is the only reason you're going to use multi-touch attribution is because you have multiple audiences, because you have multiple campaigns, because you're chasing down 10 different versions of an ad. It's there to provide an answer to a question that you shouldn't be asking in a way that ultimately delivers information that you can't trust, so that you ultimately try to prioritize being reactionary to customer journeys you can't control. And the only reason this really has value is because it is feeding the ego of the marketer. And that's not a slight against marketers. To be fair, most people that run in advertising and work at agencies and all of that were taught that this is what's important. The problem is systemic in the industry. The education of what KPIs to value is fundamentally flawed. So MTA, multi-touch attribution, is basically designed to be a very sexy answer to a question that doesn't mean anything and ultimately causes more harm than good, to justify the investment in depreciating assets, ultimately to conduct an effort that does not scale the business. That's why MTA isn't legit. It might be accurate to some extent, depending on whose opinion. And generally, the person whose opinion actually matters is the person paying the bill. And that is a fundamentally flawed way of looking at data. That's no good. No good at all.